And I thought, but didn't say, I don't want to have to protect my son from tear gas in a residential neighborhood.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, talk a little bit about an early spring, and then later on we sit down with author Sari Bashi, who's got a book out titled Upside Down Love, a Memoir in Two Voices. It is a great pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well, I have one of the most first world problems I think you're
Lay it
hear
on
this week. But, maybe our listeners will have some advice for me. So before we get into the heaviness, because all things feel heavy right now, I have a problem I want to bring to the listeners or to you and see if anybody knows how to help. So we've done a lot. For those of you who've been with us for a while, we have downsized into a 100-year-old house, and all of the adventures.
The struggle is real.
The struggle is real. But in redoing and fixing up and, living in this house, we've also had the opportunity to try a lot of things for the first time.
Yes, we have.
So one of the things that we did for the first...
Falling through the floor.
Well, yes. That's one. Evicting skunks from under the house would be two. There are many... Finding a frog in the toilet would be three.
Taking care of a cat. Actually, a couple of cats.
Outdoor cats.
Outdoor cats.
We enjoy them, though. They hunt the critters.
They do.
Anyways, one of the things that we've done for the first time is we, in the fall, I guess it was the fall, planted bulbs.
We did.
Right. We've never tried this before.
And when you say we, you bought them. I planted them.
Okay. Teamwork makes the dream work. So, yes, I bought them. You planted them in the ground. And what we got the most of, I think, was tulips.
Yes.
I love tulips. My mom loved tulips. My grandmother loved tulips. It's just been a thing. My birthday's in April. And so it just reminds me of my birthday, spring. Love them. So we got a bunch of tulip bulbs and then two other kind of flowers for which I don't remember their names, nor do I remember when they're supposed to sprout. But I do know the tulips are supposed to sprout around my birthday.
Right.
Mitch, they're sprouting.
I know, and it's not your birthday.
Yeah. So I'm worried about this. The other thing is, I don't know, it's too early,
right.
I think. And I think we'll get some more freezes. And so I'm really concerned that our tulips are not going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I don't know is I noticed in the flower bed, there were some of the bulbs looked like they had come to the surface of the dirt. And I thought the squirrels had been digging them up. And so I kind of covered them back with some dirt. And then I realized maybe that's kind of how they grow. So I may have doubly messed up the tulips. I don't know.
Well, I went out there today and it looks like there are even more buds shooting through the dirt. So I think they're going to be okay. But yeah.
It's not even March yet.
I know. It's early February. The weather's been really crazy.
It's late February, but...
Yeah, late February, early March. Yeah.
It's late February.
Yeah.
So it's not even March yet. And so anyways, I'm very worried that for our first go of planting bulbs, we're going to have a big fail and then be dejected. But anyways, if anybody has any advice of what we can do to save our tulips, let me know.
Yeah, we could certainly.
Missy@goodfaithmedia.org.
Let the email start.
With some tulip advice, you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyways, enough of the, first world problem.
Dosing a little bit of joy. Microdosing a little bit of joy.
Hopefully there will be joy at the end of that story. We 2 weeks ago, for those of you who listened, we told a story from our time at the Dallas immigration office. We spent some time there. If you want to go back and listen and hear about that, you really should. It was powerful. Our experience. I'm not sure we told the stories very well, but our experience was powerful. And I told of a young woman who had to basically come from the hospital after having a baby to check in with her appointment. And when we were there, we did not know if she was being detained or not. And it haunted me. I fretted and I worried about her because, as we said, you've got a pretty big chance of being detained these days. And she had just had a baby. And I did find out that she was released.
Good.
So for those of you who were listening and maybe like me, we're concerned. I mean, we're concerned about everybody, of course, but this young mom just really stuck out in my mind. So she did not get detained. So in talking to our friend, the Reverend Dr. George Mason, many of our listeners will be familiar. He was the one that updated me on the young mother. But he also told me a story that just has stuck with me, and I know with you, and actually plays, unfortunately, really well into our interview today with Sari Bashi. He was talking about another woman who came through for her appointment at the immigration office. And before she went in, George was there and offered to pray with her. She sought him out for prayer before she went in, and he did so and prayed with her, and then she went into her appointment. She thankfully was released. She was not detained.
Yeah.
But she came back out, and I'm not going to do this story justice because it I don't know, it made me want to cry when I heard it. But she said she thanked him for praying with her because she said when she went through those doors, she said everyone that touched her or handled paperwork, that she had to fill out, put on gloves, surgical gloves. And she said it was just the most dehumanizing thing for people to just be fearful of even handling the same pen or, just guiding you down to the hallway or whatever. And I thought of that, of all the people that she encountered, and at each stop, somebody stopping before they dealt with you to put on surgical gloves. It's dehumanizing.
Yeah, 100% it's dehumanizing. And the first thing that she said to George when she walked out of the facility was, "Thank you for the prayer. It made me feel human."
Right.
And that took him off guard. And then she explained what happened inside of the center, as you just described. And it should not be surprising, but it certainly was startling and alarming to us to hear it firsthand from an individual who had just experienced it. And this is just, again, another reminder. And we continue to hear story after story about how the United States government is dehumanizing individuals. Now, it begins with rhetoric, calling them animals, calling them savages, and really identifying them as the
worst of the worst.
All of it is a tactic to dehumanize them. And then when they actually go into a center, and let's not forget, Missy, these people are following the law.
Right.
They are doing it, quote unquote,
the right way.
The right way. When they walk into the facility, the first thing that the government does is to treat them as non-humans by putting a barrier between them and the government. And it is dehumanizing. And as people of faith, it really is infuriating. It breaks my heart because I think of all the scriptures that tell us that people are made in the image of God. And to think that other humans are treating other humans as non-humans or the other goes against God's plan or God's will, however you want to characterize that. It goes against the teachings of Scripture. And I don't see anywhere in the Bible where that is okay. And so when Dr. Mason told us that, it just broke our hearts. It once again fueled the fury inside of us that this is happening in our country right now at this moment. But it also inspired me to keep doing this work, continue to be vocal about what's going on, and to make certain that every person realizes that migrants are human beings. They are our brothers and sisters, nothing less than that. And we should be taking care of them.
So along the same lines of telling these stories about these two young women in particular, we had our staff retreat last week in Austin, and the theme kind of that you selected for the week was about storytelling and about narrative. And we kicked off our retreat with, you just went around the table and had all of us tell a story, which was hugely stressful for me. But it was such an interesting exercise of just listening to what people had to say. And you said it could be about anything.
Yeah.
So everybody told just a story, whatever they wanted to tell. And it's such a powerful reminder of narrative and of the importance of listening to someone and seeing their humanity and hearing where they've been or hearing what they've experienced. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when when George told us this story. That is such a powerful narrative because you can imagine that feeling of that glove snapping at every stop that she made and how that made her feel.
Yeah.
And so likewise, this week we talked to Sari Bashi about her book, Upside Down Love, which is another example of systems that seek to separate and other people and try to convince you that one person is legal and one person is illegal, or one person is not worthy of existing, when another person is. She writes such a powerful book about this very thing. And it just was again, another reminder of the power of narrative and the power of story, and how much more we can understand and relate once someone is willing to be vulnerable and share that with us.
And it illustrates not only the power of narrative, but also the importance of understanding the real narrative. Because you and I grew up in evangelical backgrounds.
Mhm.
We bought into the entire everybody has to support the state of Israel because that is God's intention.
Mhm.
And so that was the narrative that was dominant growing up and even as a young adult. But then all of a sudden, I started to explore the full narrative. First thing I did is I actually read the Bible instead of taking preachers' words
How
for it.
very even dare you.
Right. I discovered that, especially out of the family of Abraham, that there are two really important stories. One that the Hebrew scriptures follow, and that of Isaac, but then also the story of Ishmael.
Mhm.
And really understanding it to its full capacity, and the significance and importance of Hagar, as well as Sarah. And, just the reality of that story really came to fruition for me. But then you continue along the history and you begin to discover this people that evolves into the Palestinians. And then when it really got real for me is when I moved to Oklahoma and I met, I know,
Sorry.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Let that sink in for just a second.
I missed that off ramp. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. But you know exactly what I'm about to say. I moved to Oklahoma and I met Ahmad and Chassi.
Yeah.
Palestinian refugee, grew up in Beirut, Lebanon. There's no better friend you can have in the world than the Imam, Ahmad and Chassi. And we have laughed, we have cried. He has shared his story with me. I've shared my story with him. I have been to Beirut. I have eaten on the top of his family's roof, overlooking the Lebanese landscape. And I discovered that evening that there is an entire narrative that I was never told. Only not told, never experienced.
Right.
Those moments happen, and you discover that your entire life you have been told that these other people, God's chosen, the problem. Then on that evening on the roof, you discover they're more like me than I could ever imagine. They're more like our family than we could ever imagine. They're human beings. They're just like us.
And they're a beloved part of creation,
Absolutely.
just like us.
Absolutely. It just changes everything.
It's funny you mentioned kind of how we grew up, and just it was, I don't know, I didn't really think too much about it. It was just in the air we breathed, the water we swam in, that just Israel, could do no wrong and all of this. And it reminded me in our conversation of a few weeks back, I don't remember which episode it was, when we talked to Reverend Sex.
Okay.
Now you're waiting to see what I do with this, right?
There was an off-ramp.
But Reverend Sex was saying, you've got to look at who benefits from the system.
Yeah.
Who is benefiting from this? And in each of these stories that we've talked about in the intro, and then Sari's story here in a moment in the interview, that's what we have to keep in mind. Who is benefiting from the system? Who is benefiting from the rules? Who is benefiting from the villainization of other people?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you can't help but get angry, even if you're on the side of the people who are quote unquote in power or winning or whatever you want to call it. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to remember going forward, is to always be concerned with and always be looking out for who is benefiting from X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And listen to people's stories, listen to the narratives, pay attention to what people are going through in their daily lives, what they're struggling with, what their joys are. Be there in, community with other human beings not with a system that is seeking to control and to oppress.
Yeah. And Sari and Osama's story is, I mean, as I was reading through it, and then in our interview this week, I just kept thinking, wow, this really could be a Bible story because
Right.
you've got this Jewish lawyer activist who marries a Palestinian professor in the middle of the quote unquote Holy Land. And with all the restrictions, with all the tensions and turmoil, they are living out this love story. And it's complicated, it's difficult, but it's also wrapped in beauty and love. And it really is an incredible
Yeah,
story.
you talk about a narrative of forbidden love.
Yeah.
I want to petition to get Romeo and Juliet out of the freshman English, curriculum and bring in this story because I think, I know there's a lot to be learned from classical literature. Don't at me about this. However, I think this story is one that just is so relatable and powerful and helps to really humanize something that has been so dehumanized in our lifetime.
Absolutely. Well, Missy and I will be right back after the break with Sari Bashi. She's got a new book out titled Upside Down Love, a memoir in 2 voices.
I'm Cliff Vaughn, Senior Media Producer at Good Faith Media. In addition to our in-house original productions, we also produce content with and for other individuals and organizations. If you need help bringing your videos or podcasts to life, get in touch with us at Good Faith Media. We bring decades of experience and eagerness to collaborate and the ability to just get it done and not break the bank. Reach out at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Sari Bashi is an internationally renowned human rights lawyer, former program director at Human Rights Watch, and co-founder of the Israeli human rights organization Gisha. She is a graduate of Yale Law School and has previously clerked on the Israeli Supreme Court. She has taught international humanitarian law at Yale Law School and Tel Aviv University. She has also been a Jerusalem correspondent for the Associated Press and has appeared on and been interviewed by major English language outlets. Sari's book, Upside Down Love, a memoir in 2 voices, it is extraordinarily personal narrative, a chronicle of an Israeli lawyer, a Palestinian professor, and a love that transcends all division. Sari, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you for having me.
Sari, first of all, thank you for being with us. I have to say, I loved the book. Our regular listeners know memoirs are my first go-to if I'm reading for pleasure. So anytime we get assigned a memoir for the podcast, I'm doubly excited. So, but I really enjoyed listening to your book. But I wondered if you could tell us, because this, as a memoir, it's pretty unique in several ways, but the one way is just how it came to be. I wonder if you could kick off by telling us how it was written.
Sure. So when my partner and I fell in love, it was overwhelming. It's hard to explain how strong the taboos were. I'm an Israeli Jew. He's a Palestinian from a Muslim family. I was his lawyer. It was something we couldn't talk about. And so because I couldn't really tell anybody, I started to write. And there were times in our relationship when it was hard, and sometimes we broke up or we struggled to communicate. And sometimes we would write to each other. And I would write in Hebrew, he would write in Arabic. And there was a little bit of safety in that because I knew that he couldn't 100% understand everything I was writing. And he knew that I was missing some of what he was writing. And so it made it easier for us to be honest. So the book incorporates some of that correspondence, but it's also things that I wrote later on to try to tell a story that really could only be told in 2 voices.
So I found myself, as I was reading the book, consulting maps, because I feel like for those of us who didn't grow up anywhere near there and only were fed one narrative, in our upbringing, in our history classes, it's hard to conceptualize the area and what the movement, constriction is. So describe to us just the size of the area that Osama, your partner, is restricted to within the book that you tell the stories about.
So when I met him, he had been trapped in the West Bank city of Ramallah for 6 years. He was originally from Gaza, had moved to Ramallah as a young man 2 decades earlier, but the Israeli authorities control the Palestinian population registry, so basically where people are allowed to live, and they wouldn't allow him to change his address from Gaza to the West Bank. So that meant that he was afraid to leave the greater Ramallah area, it's a small city of about 60,000 people, for fear that if he approached a checkpoint, a soldier might see his address being Gaza in the ID card and then remove him to Gaza by force. And he would have lost his home, his son, his job, his wife at the time. So he needed my help as a lawyer in order to be able to travel. He'd been accepted to doctoral study programs, both in Israel and the UK. And then I was able to submit a court petition on his behalf so that he would be able to travel. So that let him come in and out of a very small area. But most of the book takes place in the West Bank after he returns. And there you get a sense of a landscape that is beautiful, but also quite scarred. The entirety of Israel-Palestine is about the size of the state of New Jersey, but it's divided up into areas that are off limits to Palestinians, checkpoints and concrete walls and fences and things that not only aren't very pretty, but also make it quite difficult to just live one's daily life.
So you mentioned the taboos of your love story and of you guys just trying to be together. So in that, I wondered if there was at any point when you were writing or putting the book together that you worried for your safety in telling your story.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm an introverted person. So there's something very appealing for me about writing because it lets me think through what I'm feeling when I'm alone in a room, which if you're an introvert, that's your happy place. And then there's a second decision to share
Right.
after you've already put the words down on paper. And so for me, the first part was easy because I wanted to get it out of my mind and onto paper. The decision to share was a lot harder. I think anybody who writes memoir struggles with privacy. You're putting yourself out there. Even worse, you're putting your friends and family out there because they didn't ask to be written about in your book. But it added to that is that we live in a place that's not safe. There are, social repercussions, professional repercussions, and even security repercussions. So it took a long time, even after the book was written, to decide to publish it.
One of the things I really appreciated about the memoir was your vulnerability. I mean, both you and Osama really kind of, reveal your most inner thoughts. And one of those thoughts that you address in the book is you identify what you call a bundle of contradictions. You are an American-born Jew, an Israeli citizen, and a human rights lawyer. So here's my question for you out of this very vulnerable memoir that you penned. Did your relationship with Osama challenge you to confront some of the privileges of your Israeli passport that maybe your legal work didn't push you, far enough? I mean, it was really an interesting story that you revealed in just telling it as you did.
Absolutely. I mean, the question of privilege or power imbalance repeatedly almost tore us apart.
Right.
Because when you meet somebody, it's very fragile. You want a chance to get to know each other, and you need a little bit of grace where you can just be together and get to know each other as human beings. But for us, we were constantly being pulled at by societal forces. And I think for Osama, it was really hard that I was free and he was not.
Right.
And how could he love somebody who could run for miles through the West Bank and fly to New York and see my mother and come to him all the time? And he could never come to me. I could come see him in the West Bank, and he could never come to me in Tel Aviv. And there's a part of the book that's a little bit funny, but it also shows something. There's a part of the book where we broke up, and I was done. I was not having any more of it.
I remember that part.
And he, yeah,
That
and
part's
he like
very
again
relatable.
yes,
Yeah, in fact,
yes.
Missy and I broke up right before this interview.
That's true.
Yeah. Love is hard.
That's right.
So he broken up with me again and then wanted me back again, and I was having none of it. I was done. And he wanted to see me, but the terms of our relationship and the terms of my privilege were such that he could not come to Tel Aviv. And I wasn't going to come to Ramallah because I was angry and hurt. And so in the book, he's scheming to make a fake medical report to try to get a humanitarian permit from the Israeli authorities to visit me in Tel Aviv, so that he could come and say he was sorry. But that imbalance never really went away. And it still exists today. I think maybe what's different is that as we became stronger together and more of a unit, we could resist it together. So in the beginning, it was the message that we felt was that you are different and you should not be together. And I think as our love became stronger, it was just the two of us against the world, disagreeing with that kind of privilege and frankly, racial hierarchy. But it no longer threatened kind of the resilience of our relationship.
Well, let me tell you, faking medical records is the most romantic thing I think I've heard in a while. So swoon.
More original than roses.
That's right. Exactly.
I mean, but as you talk about, and what I found fascinating about your story was just learning about the actual real life that you exist in over there legally. But in addition to that, you talk about taboos all over the place. You had family to deal with. I wonder if we could talk about your family for a minute. Starting with, both of your extended families, your parents, and how did that work as far as, you're dealing with all of these legal ramifications of your relationship, but you almost didn't even probably get the same privilege of figuring out how to meld in-laws, especially when you're coming from two different faiths and culture backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing that makes me sad is that the mothers-in-law never met. Particularly in Jewish tradition, the relationship between mother-in-laws is really important. It can make or break a family.
Right.
And my mother and his mother have never met and probably never will. And actually, my kids almost never met their grandmother. It was kind of a bittersweet thing that happened just recently. But we live in the West Bank, and his family is all in Gaza, and it's only about 50 miles away. But there's no travel allowed, so it might as well be the other side of the moon. But during the war, his mother was the only one of the family to leave, and she fled to Egypt. And so because she was in Egypt, we could see her. So, we took the kids there and they met their grandmother. But other than that, for the most part, we don't get to see our families, especially his family. And that's hard and isolating. But I think it probably made it easier for us because we didn't have that kind of pressure close by. And yes, our relationship was hard for different family members, mine and his, but probably because they didn't have to be confronted with it in a close way, maybe there was less pressure on us.
So you bring up your children, and that was one of the most fascinating parts of the book was when Osama and you guys had some conflict early on about you wanted children and he was hesitant for understandable reasons. One thing he said was if you guys had a child, it would be better to have a daughter just because of the expectations and military requirements for sons. You had a daughter, but then you also have a son. So I was wondering what their life is like, and in particular, do you have those fears for either of them, but especially for your son?
I mean, I don't know a parent who's not afraid for their kids, no
Right.
matter what the circumstances are. But I think that my kids have the privilege and also the challenge of living in many different kinds of worlds. And they've been code switching since they were very young. They speak, or at least can understand, all three languages:
Wow.
Arabic, Hebrew, and English. And they can fit in lots of different places, which is beautiful, but it can also make your head explode, especially when it's a little child's head, because there's so many contradictions and so much hostility between the two different societies. I think for my son, in a strange way, I was able to protect him in a way that most of my Israeli friends have not been able to protect their sons. If you disagree with what the Israeli military is doing and you live in Israel, as a parent, you face a really difficult dilemma. And many of my friends have left. because they didn't want their children to be drafted into the military, particularly their sons, because the sons do combat duty. And in a funny way, I was able to protect my son from that. As the child of a Palestinian from a Muslim family, he will never be drafted. And that's a really big relief for me. I remember there was actually an incident that I wrote about in my blog when he was a baby, and I took him for an early morning run in a jogging stroller, and I encountered Israeli soldiers who were conducting a raid and had thrown tear gas in our residential neighborhood. And so I've got my 18-month-old in the jogging stroller, and there's a huge cloud of tear gas, and I'm running away to try to protect him from the tear gas. And then later I was telling a close friend of mine who had a son the same age about it. And he kind of, laughed and said, "Oh, are you sure you want to live where you are, for
Right.
your son's sake?" And I thought, but didn't say, I don't want to have to protect my son from tear gas in a residential neighborhood, but I even less want him to grow up to be the soldier who's throwing the tear gas canisters in a residential neighborhood. And that's the danger that my friend's son, and really every Israeli parent faces, that I've been able to protect my kids from.
How do you handle in your home raising children? I mean, we have this happen. I mean, it happens all over the world. You get people of two different faith backgrounds who marry and have children, and it's just everybody's unique in the way they navigate that melding. So how does that play out in your house?
Neither my partner nor I are religious, but I am traditional. I keep a kosher kitchen. It may be the only kosher kitchen in a Palestinian city. You'd have to fact check that for me. And I do holidays and foods, and they live in a society that is traditionally Muslim. So they certainly learn about Muslim holidays and have that taught in school. From my perspective, they get to decide what they want to be. And because they're children, it's likely to change probably 100 times before they become adults. But it also is fraught here, because to be Jewish in the West Bank for Palestinians, it's not neutral. Unfortunately, Judaism, the Hebrew language, are associated with the Israeli occupation. And so I find myself doing a lot of work trying to explain to the people around me and also to my kids that Judaism is a rich, beautiful, thousands-year-old tradition. And it is not the same thing as Zionism or the Israeli occupation or the Israeli regime.
I'm going to interject one more question because you mentioned in the book and you just mentioned now about the language. And what I thought was just such a powerful statement was when you talked about Osama's friends hearing, Hebrew and kind of responding to that. Talk to us about that a little bit because I think that's such a powerful story.
Yeah. So when our daughter was born, she came early. She was preterm and she was hospitalized for about a month. So everybody was really dying to meet the new baby. So
Right.
when we took her home, friends came to see her, and she was sleeping. And so when she woke up, I approached her and I picked her up, and I told her in kind of the sweet, silly tones that mothers use for newborns, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll give you some milk." But I spoke to her in Hebrew, which was the language that I'd gotten used to speaking to her in when we were in the hospital together. And I still speak to her in Hebrew. And as soon as I opened my mouth to speak to her, our friend sitting on the couch suddenly stopped their conversation and froze. And there was a beat, and then they laughed because they had never heard Hebrew spoken with tenderness before. For them, it was a language of violence that they heard at checkpoints. And I'd like to believe that there's a potential for transformation for people in the West Bank to hear Hebrew as it's just a language. I understood their laugh to be yeah, it's just a language. And that's part of what I have to navigate with my kids a lot, because people's initial reaction to Judaism, to Hebrew, is one of fear.
Right.
So, sorry, I want to return back to the religion question because here in the United States, a lot of times when the topic of Israel and Palestine is mentioned, it's always couched in with these religious overtones, and obviously, there's and from my perspective, a huge misconception on that the country should always support the state of Israel because of biblical mandates. You hear that a lot here in the United States. So, my question to you, to just really try to clarify for folks here in the United States, to think that this is still a religious conflict. How much does religion play into the actual conflict there? Or is it more of a cultural conflict that's become social political from the standpoint that religion is used as a tool to exert power and control over other people?
Yeah. I mean, I know that some people believe that what's happening in Israel Palestine is some biblically ordained tribal ethnic conflict that's destined to take place for forever.
Mhm.
But that's not what I see. What I see and experience is a system of oppression. There's a government here that is exercising control over 7.5 million Jews and 7.5 million Palestinians, and treating one group much better than the other in what I would call a racial hierarchy. And it's not about religion; it's about power. It's a government that is being given the opportunity, including by U.S. military, diplomatic, and political support, to abuse that power. And I don't know a lot of governments that, given the opportunity to abuse power, will pass up on that.
Right.
So it's not. The problem is not tribalistic. The problem is transforming the current system of government from one of Jewish supremacy to one of equality and dignity for all. And once we do that, then people will be able to live normal lives, pluralistic lives. Because, the Middle East, Palestine, the Levant has always been pluralistic, and there's a deep history of tolerance.
Mhm.
It's never been perfect, but all different kinds of groups have lived in the Levant and in Palestine. We've done so in the past, and we can do so again, but we need a different system.
And so you also talk about in the book the right of return, both from Israel Jews as well as Palestinians. How did that change over time with your relationship with Osama? Did it change? Do you have a different perspective on it now? And let's be even more blunt. How do you see that playing out in the future? If we only could tell, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, my in-laws are refugees.
Mhm.
My partner grew up in a refugee camp in Gaza. So my mother-in-law, as a 5-year-old child, was expelled from her village, and this was part of a broader policy of ethnic cleansing in 1948. And I think both becoming more personally involved in his family history, as well as just learning more about the history, I, I became aware of something that can be uncomfortable for people who want a Jewish majority state. And that reality is that there is no way to have a Jewish majority state in the reality we have today without ethnically cleansing Palestinians,
Yeah.
either by actively doing it, as is being done now in Gaza and the West Bank, or by perpetuating the ethnic cleansing of 1948 by blocking the return of Palestinian refugees. So I actually think that realizing the right of return for Palestinian refugees could be part of a wonderful transformation where you let indigenous people return to their lands and you create a system that is not about a minority holding on to power by abusing others, but rather an equal democratic system of governments that would allow everybody to live together in peace. And there's something that I want to say about that that's really hard after what's happened in the last 2.5 years. It can be really hard for Palestinians to think of living with Jews after what many people believe is a genocide in Gaza. And it can be really hard for Jews to think about living with Palestinians after the massacre of
Yeah.
October 7th.
Yeah.
And what I can say is that Palestinians and Jews, we are living together. We're just living together really badly. And we can live together better through a system that gives dignity and equality to everybody.
Love that.
I love that. So, one of the obvious questions from those of us living in relative comfort, in reading your book and in talking to you is why do you stay? And I think to answer that, let's go back further. Before you met Osama, let's go back to what brought you to the work that you do and why you continue to stay there.
Sure. So I grew up in a Jewish family in the United States. My father is from Iraq, but grew up in Israel and then came to the United States. And I grew up in a home that wasn't particularly political, but if political, then Zionist, and if Zionist, then right-wing Zionism. And I learned about what was happening in Israel Palestine as part of a long history of persecution of Jews. So as a child, I learned that during the Spanish Inquisition, the Spaniards persecuted Jews, and then the Nazis in the Holocaust persecuted Jews, and now the Arabs are persecuting Jews. And when I was older, and I spent more time in Israel Palestine as an adult, I worked as a journalist, and I had an opportunity to see what the Israeli government was doing and to draw my own conclusions, which is, well, actually, and this is something that can be hard maybe for American Jews to grasp, actually in Israel Palestine, Jews are not a vulnerable minority. They are in power in the government and they're using that power badly, not because they're Jewish, because people in power tend to abuse it no matter what religion they are. And so that for me began a process of transforming the way I see reality in Israel Palestine, but also I wanted to be able to do something about it. So I went to law school, I became a human rights lawyer. I founded Gisha, which is a human rights group that helps Palestinians in Gaza overcome restrictions on their freedom of movement. And I wanted to fight. And I did fight, and I'm still fighting. And so many people, Israelis and Palestinians, have left because it's hard here, and people leave also to protect their children. And I won't say that we don't check on our kids and we don't ask ourselves questions about how they're doing. But for now, I think they're okay. And I want to fight. What's happening here is wrong. And if I have the ability to do something about it, then I want to do that.
So, obviously, this book is a re-release. You wanted to add to your story after October 7th, 2023, and there's obviously lots going on in Israel Palestine right now. You all are living in the midst of it there in the West Bank. So, could you just give us a brief description, update on how things are where you live, you and Osama live?
Sure. So the book came out in Hebrew in 2021, and then it's been published more recently into Dutch, Italian, English, and next month, hopefully Spanish.
Good.
And a lot has happened. Look, the last 2.5 years have been horrible. The level of violence and destruction and death has been, just shocking to anybody who has a heart. And Osama's family is all in Gaza. And, he spent the war overcome with guilt and helplessness and rage and fear, knowing that they weren't safe. They were losing weight because they didn't have enough food. They lost their homes. They lost family members. And, we could do nothing. And that was really hard. I wrote about it in this New York Times Modern Love column during the war, what it was like to love somebody and try to reach somebody you love who's feeling that much pain. And things in the West Bank have also been transformed. The travel restrictions have gotten much more intense. It's very difficult to get around. Every Palestinian area in the West Bank is closed in by an iron gate, yellow or orange, that's usually closed, blocking entrances to the main roads. So if you want to go from point A to point B, you have to do a 50-mile detour until you find a way to get to a main road that's open. And even then, that could be past a checkpoint. It's very difficult. And there's been a lot of settler violence, state-sponsored settler violence. So people are afraid, particularly in the villages. It's just you become much more constrained. And that's nothing compared with what's been happening in Gaza, but it really impacts people's daily lives, and people in the West Bank worry about an increasing Gazification here. Already there's been a lot of destruction and forced displacement in the northern West Bank of some of those refugee camps, and people worry that it's coming, to every part of the West Bank.
So you mentioned that Osama's mother was able to leave, and some of his family members lost their homes and things. So how are they doing now?
It's better since the ceasefire, but it's still hard. His nieces and nephew were accepted to universities abroad after their university in Gaza was destroyed, but they can't get out. The Rafah crossing is only nominally open to a very small number of mostly medical patients. And, they want to continue their studies, particularly for the younger people in his family. They don't see a horizon for themselves. And my mother-in-law, she's still in Egypt. She wants to go home. She wants to go back to her children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, but she can't. And daily stuff is still hard. Electricity, food, trying to find shelter. It's not over yet in Gaza.
So sorry for those of us here in the States and around the world. What can we do to help the situation? I mean, obviously, we're trying to advocate here in the United States for less military action in the state of Israel. But is there anything else we can do to help Osama and Palestinians?
I mean, look, I think what's been happening in the United States is really exciting. There's been a sea change in terms of public opinion, in terms of organizing around Israel-Palestine in a way that hasn't yet reached the level of policy change, but it will. And it's coming from younger people. It's coming from the future. And it's really encouraging because it's U.S. military, economic, and diplomatic power that is enabling abuses in Israel-Palestine. And as soon as there's a change in the U.S., we will feel it very, very quickly. So what I mostly want to say is keep doing what you're doing. Keep asking questions and engaging in empathetic, compassionate, human dialogue about what's happening in Israel-Palestine, writing to elected representatives, speaking to members of your community, particularly people who have a strong faith. For people who care about justice, and so many people of faith care about justice, it's not that hard to see what's happened. It's not that complicated. There are two groups of people. One is being treated better than the other, and that's not okay. And just to keep that clear-eyedness, I think that what's happening in the U.S. will very soon have positive results for us in Israel-Palestine.
Sari Bashi, thank you so much for joining us this week on Good Faith Weekly. The book is titled Upside Down Love, a memoir in two voices. It's about Sari and her husband, Osama. It is a wonderful tale that you're going to want to pick up right after this pod. But Sari, before we let you go, we've got one last question. You know what's coming. Missy's going to ask you.
Well, before I get to the question, I just want to say again, thank you for writing the book. Personal narrative is so powerful, and I feel like I learned more about history through your story and more about what's happening on the ground than I ever did in a classroom. And so there's only one thing that I absolutely still don't get, and that's the love of running. But
not just running, ultra marathoner.
You are a long distance runner. So while I applaud you from the sideline, I will bring you some water. I don't get it. Everything else I felt like was very, on a human level, very relatable.
That was superhuman.
Yes. So again, thank you. As you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is there's more to tell. So in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Food, of course,
Yes.
of course. The book has a recipe at the end for maklube, which is a Palestinian chicken and rice dish that you cook, and then when you finish cooking it, you turn it upside down. And makluba means upside down in Arabic. And food is a huge part of the book. It's a part of our lives. It's what brings people together. So if you buy the book, make the recipe. If you have any questions, reach out to me. We can talk about water levels and how to fry the eggplant. But food, because it's what brings us all together.
I love that. All right, Sari, thank you so much again for being with us. You are welcome back anytime, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, we want to thank you for joining us. Missy and I will be back next week with another incredible guest. And until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.